Present-day scholarship tends to make a mockery, if only unwittingly, of Leo Strauss's lesson concerning the esoteric writing. Why is there a misunderstanding? Where does it come from? What does it involve? What does Leo Strauss really have to say about the esoteric? What he really has to say is tied to the question of the exoteric, and we'll get to that. Now, what is the dominant view in academic circles about Leo Strauss's lesson on the esoteric? In earlier times, we had writers who were faced with the threat of persecution, dire censorship. So they had to conceal their views. They wrote so that a select few, right, would understand the core message, the core views, and then they also wrote for a majority of people who would see a kind of surface and would be reassured by that surface without having to worry about secret lessons, secret messages. Now, this view, as stated and more or less as represented thus, is perfectly compatible with, in fact, with the fundamental convictions of contemporary scholarship. Convictions that are tied to an evolutionist, historicist understanding of things, shall we say. Why is this significant? Well, Leo Strauss was addressing two types of scenario. The first, the Platonic cave. The second, what he called the second cave, the modern cave. What happens in the first cave? The first cave, shall we say, is a natural cave, the fallen world, open, however, to the external reality. In other words, if you look at Plato's cave, you see that it is all quite open to the world of the divine forms of intelligibility, the ultimate reality, the ultimate order of things, right? In the light of truth, things in their proper or original place, things as they are, the world of being. Right? So the world of semblance is altogether open through poetic mediation to the world as it is. Now, in the modern world, we don't have that type of setup. Our cave is closed as Leibniz's monads, to absolute truth. Right. What does this mean? It means that we do not see life as a return to its foundation. We see it as an attempt to incorporate truth within it, as an attempt to actually reconstruct or produce truth within it. Now, for the modern Straussian, right, modernist, right, Straussian, evolutionist, historicist Straussian, Strauss is telling us that the truth to be hidden is to be hidden in the modern cave, in a world in evolution, in the historicist world. Our cave is not naturally open to the divine, to divine transcendence through poets. Instead, divine transcendence, in line with contemporary dominant views, is conceived as somehow hidden, we could even say imprisoned, in a world devoid of it. Right? An evolutionary world. Being is evolutionary. It's always changing. There's nothing fundamentally permanent. However, what we have in terms of anchorage is the view that nothing is permanent. Right? So that view can help us establish a life that is immune to the vulgar plebeian conviction that some things within our world are stable and permanent. Right? Political, moral standards. No such thing. However, our standard as Straussians is this insight into the impermanence of all things. Now, this is essentially Historicism. Okay? So it's this historical sense, this sense of history that anchors us, that helps us take a distance from all ordinary, non-philosophical certainties, and that gives us this capacity to transcend them, right? To live in the world without believing in anything, really. Now, this is Historicism again. The irony here is that Leo Strauss argued extensively and throughout his academic career against historicism of all stripes, strands, on all levels, against Nietzsche, against Heidegger, as insofar as Heidegger provided a scientific rigor for the historicist position. And now we have so-called Straussians who are de facto reconstructing Strauss as an historicist. An historicist who shies away from exposing himself as a historicist. It's pretty twisted. Now, why is this all important for a general public? Well, in technical terms, it is not. However, what is at stake is important for all. What is at stake? There is an element of truth in what is said today about Strauss. What is that element of truth? The element of truth is that not everything is transparent. That there is an inner life. The problem here is that the inner life should not be construed in Cartesian terms. My certainties as opposed to the certainties of the unwashed masses. How is it to be understood then? The secretive, the hidden. Well, the hidden belongs to divine transcendence, very simply put. Now, this divine transcendence is not to be understood, or construed rather, in terms of our certainties, anyone's certainties, not even the empty sham certainty of historicists who say, I am certain that everything is in flux. There are no moral standards. There are no absolutes. There is no absolute truth. There is only, no substantive truth. There is only this certainty that all is uncertain. And thanks to this certainty, I can keep going. Right? I can wade my way through life and perhaps even play on the naivete of people who believe that there are standards, that there are substantive truths that are immutable. In a piece called Exoteric Teaching, Leo Strauss refers to Lessing as having rejected a political solution, or the modern notion of a possible political solution to the problem of civilization, in favor of the way leading to absolute truth, the way of philosophy. The way leading to absolute truth, the way of philosophy. Now, what is the absolute truth? Here is the problem. And here is where the exoteric is important in classical terms. The problem is that the absolute truth would be a farce if it were merely a matter of stating that there is no absolute truth. The absolute truth being the absence of absolute truth. This would be tantamount to saying that the true God is the absence of any true God. So the truth about God is that there is no God, the abyss. This is Nietzsche. So in this respect, by and large, right, Straussians today tend to be Nietzscheans. This is very silly as a position. It's very anti-Straussian in essence. So, what is the alternative, and how does it relate to the exoteric? Now, if we look at the first cave, and that's why Strauss emphasizes the ancients, we look at the first cave, we see that our fallen condition, our condition as men lost in confusion, right, is open to a divine nature, a divine order of things. So the absolute truth is substantive. It's not just a matter of the absence of truth. It is something presupposed by the absence. It is being itself as opposed to the absence of being or the pretense of being. So what we have with the modern Straussians is, modernist Straussians, is the distinction between being and the pretense of being, replaced by the distinction between the pretense of being and the absence of being. Being, to begin with, is non-being. Exoteric writing in the classical sense is about speaking the truth in such a way as not to enrage those bent upon turning our world into a graveyard. In other words, fatalists who say, look, there's a world outside, the beyond, the absolute, but we have no access to it. So if we want to pray to the other world, to God, whatever is on the other side, as it were, outside of the cave, then we are to focus on the shadows. By focusing on the shadows, on the contents of the cave, we prepare ourselves for the other world. One day we'll go there, right, so to speak. So that's the way to relate to the other world, to the absolute, by burying our dead. To paraphrase a passage from the Gospels. Now, what does the exoteric classicist do? He says, well, no, that's not the only way, that's not the best way to relate to the absolute. The best way is to come out of the cave. How do you do that? There is a path. There's a poetic path that is a purgational path, a path of purgation, of views, of certainties, Socratic path, that involves the courage to speak the truth, to face the truth, to witness the transcendence of the truth with respect to our cave, to expose the openness of our cave to truth, the inherence of the agency of truth, of light within the cave, a light that calls us back out of the cave. So the poet, in this case, the exoteric writer, establishes, or vindicates rather, this natural bond between the cave and what is outside of it, between appearances and reality. If we do not have that natural bond, then we're ending up with a world of sheer pretense, the Tower of Babel. And this is what modern Straussians take for granted. They consider the world as a Tower of Babel. And then they say, this is all fake. What is true is the absence of being, not the pretense of being, which is being itself for them, because they accept the message of modernity, essentially. They are founding or the esoteric on a modern principle. So what about classical exoterism, right? The exoteric writing? It has to do with pointing to, guiding us toward absolute truth, substantive absolute truth. And this involves, again, the cultivation of virtue. It's not a question of information, of certainties. Oh, now I got it. No, it is about transformation of our life. We are transformed on the way to truth. Most people are not going to be willing to meet that challenge because they are focused on worldly certainties. So we have now three types of people on the stage. We have those who cherish worldly certainties. Right? Then we have the sophists who cherish the emptiness of all certainties. And then we have those who are on the path to a substantive absolute truth. Now the situation is slightly complicated by the modern prejudice, progressive historicist prejudice, that tells the people that they're not simply to settle on tribal certainties, they are to establish a global, planetary, universal Tower of Babel. Well, they don't necessarily call it that, but they will call it the open, great society, or the we're building, the global planetary society. It's that we have to build as a tower, which essentially tells us that all divine transcendence is reconstructed or constructed anew, or in the sense of for the first time, really, so made concrete as opposed to remaining a dream, a pie in the sky, in our world. Right? So there's a world of flux, and we're building this beautiful, brand new, brave new world, so brave, right? So bold. And we're building this great world in which we realize all ancient dreams, fantasies about justice, about truth, about you name it, right? Now we have the power, and it's granted to us by technology. So this is what the non-philosopher today is up to. And what does the modernist Straussian say in the face of this? It's, well, we accept it. We accept it just as ancient sophists would accept the views that were out there, right? The conventional views. Sometimes telling some students, look, it's all fake, right? It's all fake. It's all a pretense. Come along with me and abide in the absence of all truth, and make that your truth. Right? So that's what we have today, and it's a disgrace, really, that Strauss be reconstructed in these terms. But it is not an altogether surprising disgrace, since we are in a fallen world, and most people who are faced with Strauss are not philosophers. They are sophists who see Strauss as an opportunity to support their sophistry and to gain certainty, right, in their absence of all certainty. So they turn their ignorance into a virtue. And that's what we have today. And in general, if you go on the internet, you will find this kind of a setup. At the end of the day, you say, well, what is the truth? Well, it's the absence thereof. We don't need to abide by that lesson, and there are great insights in the work of Leo Strauss that help us purge ourselves of both sophistry and the vulgar view, both in its modern progressive status, right, and in the old tribal status. So both in its pre-scientific sense and in its scientific sense, right? So as to embark, or by way of embarking on this adventure, as Shakespeare once called it, an adventure toward substantive, absolute truth.